But this one I wanted to stay much more in terms of the clothing of the Kohen Gadol. And the word clothing is not exactly the right term because he has clothing, but the Kohen Gadol also has these other things that he wears that it's not precisely clothing, but it's part of the vestments. Yeah. It's part of the Kohen Gadolship is to have these things. I'll read a little bit and then I'll tell you what was in my head that kind of I had to contend with. So as much as we started talking about a Mishkan, so on the one hand we spoke about the building of the Mishkan and the things in the Mishkan, the Aron and the Menorah and the Mizbeach and the Mishkan itself, and now it moves over to those who will serve in the Mishkan, Kohanim. Which, of course, you can ask a question. Hold it. I thought that, especially in the Ramban, everything is going in the proper sequence. So isn't it the firstborn? Meaning, why are we talking about Kohanim at this point? Weren't they only replaced after the golden calf? If we did have a share next week, I would talk about that, but I'm not going to be here next week. That means that these Kohanim are going to serve, so these are the things that the Kohen Gadol needs to wear. So again, you may or may not have noticed that I didn't translate anything, and that I didn't say what anything meant, but I do want to get to where the Torah is going to tell us some of the purpose involved in this. We'll skip to Pasuk 10. V'lakachta et shtei avnei shoham, upitachta leim shmot b'nei Yisrael. Shisha mishmotam al even hachad, v'shmot hashisha noteret al even hashenit kitoldotam. Now, whenever we have a list of all 12 tribes, or for that matter, 6 and 6, we're always going to have the same kind of question, which is going to come up: who's included and who's not included, and what's the sequence? And my sense, without getting into the sugya, the Gemara, the discussion, my sense over here, if he's going to represent all of Bnei Yisrael, then all of Bnei Yisrael should be represented, which means, what's the tension? Do we include Levi or exclude Levi? What I mean, right? What happens if Levi gets excluded? Then you have Ephraim and Menashe. I mean, that's how you get up to 10. So my sense is that on the one hand, Levi should be there, and on the other hand, Yosef should be there. Because if Yosef isn't there, even if Yosef gets 2 portions instead, there's something which is missing from the collective. And if this is supposed to be a group which represents the collective, then obviously you would want all of the collective there. So I'm just saying, there's just 2 moving pieces over here. One moving piece is Levi being removed, and the other is Yosef being removed. Of course, Yosef's removal is very different from Levi's removal. Although, if you want to be creative, you can still argue, and you can say that Levi's there, because Levi is there in person, holding the names of the others, and it's okay. But as I said, my sense was that it should have Yosef and it should have Levi, because and especially with that emphasis kitoldotam. Yeah, my suspicion is that anybody who said Nasa v'nishma was part. Now, where would they be? So that later on was mentioned, that you have the Masef Kol HaMachanot, that you have Dan, that all the others were there with Dan. So again, that we only learn later when we talk about what is going to be the exact formation around the Mishkan, but that's what it sounds like when you hear the statement over there. So over here you have this representation of all 12, again, Kitol Dotam. Masech Harash, we'll skip a little bit, Shmo B'nei Yisrael, V'samtet Shnei Avnim Al Ktafot Ephod, Avnei Zikaron L'Vnei Yisrael, V'nasa Aaron et Shmotam L'Fnei Hashem, Al Shtei Ktefav L'Zikaron. So you notice the word Zikaron being used twice. Now what's interesting about this is right now we're dealing with something which is on his body, on his torso, and not on his mind. So I would have thought that something which represents Zikaron should somehow be connected to the brain, and if there is something on the torso, again, closer to the heart, then it probably should have had some other type of of identity to it. So that's just the starting point of what's concerning me. As we move further, again in Pasuk of Aleph, we have a similar thing. Over here we're talking about the Choshem Mishpat, Bavanim Tiena al Shmot Bnei Yisrael, Shnei Yisrael Shmotam, Pituchei Chotem Ish al Shmot Tiena L'Shnei Asar Shavat. So again we have the list of the 12 tribes. V'nasa, Pasuk of Tet, V'nasa Aaron et Shmot Bnei Yisrael B'choshen HaMishpat al Libo. So again, here is the, I said torso, but here it's even more specific, on the heart. By the way, those were not the same things. I'm not getting into it right now, but there was something which is up more towards the shoulder, and there's something which is a little bit further down on the heart. So over here it says that he's going to wear this Choshen Mishpat al Libo b'vo el HaKodesh l'zikaron l'fnei Hashem tamid. So again, there's this interesting expression that you have l'zikaron, but it's on the heart. So, and I know I'm not going to go so quick and say, this is a mixing of metaphors. I can't get this person out of my heart, right? I can say that. I don't have a problem with that. But nonetheless, I find this emphasis, especially because there's going to be another element that we're going to see in a moment. Basita Tamail, and so on. Pasuk Lamed Hey, Vaya al Aaron l'sharet v'nishma l'kolo b'vo l'kodesh Hashem b'tzitro v'lo yamut, which is generally this part about the bells and so on is generally not considered at all. But there's also something interesting there, which I'll see if I can get back to. But Pasuk Lamed Vav, Vasita tzitz zahav ta'ahar. So this is something which is going to go on the head, the tzitz, upitachta lav pituach chotem kodesh la'Hashem. V'samto to p'tiot chelet, v'ya al ha-mitznefet, al mu pnei ha-mitznefet yeh, v'ya al metzach Aaron, v'nasa Aaron et avon ha-kadoshim, asher yakdishu b'nei Yisrael l'kol matanot kadoshehem, v'yal mitzchot tamid l'ratzon lahem l'fnei Hashem. So this is something which is going to be on always, but it's interesting, the word zikaron is not mentioned over here. It did mention something else, which was called ritzoi. So now, I told you that I had to contend with something. I called it a demon. It's really strong and unfortunate to use that term, so I'll tell you exactly what it is. It was a speech which later became an essay, which Rav Soloveitchik gave. So the speech that he gave was in 1940. So 1940, I guess, in terms of Rav Soloveitchik's speeches, is pretty early. So here's a man who's born in 1903, and he arrives in America in the 1930s. And after a number of years there, so at this point specifically, he is in Boston. He is considered to be the chief rabbi of Boston. He's young. He has his PhD. And there is a confluence of things that take place, and it's very hard for me, and I'm not a historian, and I didn't dig deep, and listening to people comment afterwards is of less interest. I would have liked to know exactly what was taking place at the time, but on the 5th of Av, that summer, which would be August 25th, 1940, the person who most likely at that moment would have been considered the Gadol Hador passed away. And that was the unofficial chief rabbi of Vilna. The reason why I say unofficial chief rabbi is that even though the Vilna Gaon never had the title of chief rabbi of Vilna, he never had the title of anything in Vilna. He didn't have any title, any job, anything. The first full-time Kollel member was the Vilna Gaon. And by the way, he was supported by a fund that was put away by his own ancestor. They put the money away for a descendant who would be sitting and learning, and he had his money. By the way, the person who managed the fund did not always give him all of the money, and there was some, all kinds of stuff. But the Vilna Gaon did not have any official job. He didn't take anything from anyone. He had his family money that he, and by the way, a lot of people say the Vilna Gaon's last name was Kramer. Elio Kramer. No, he had a grandfather whose name was Kramer, but his name wasn't Kramer. Kramer is a storekeeper. So the storekeeper Kramer apparently had some money and was put away, and he was never called Kramer in his lifetime, only by clever historians today who know, his grandfather was Kramer, so he must have been Kramer, but it's not. Kramer is someone else. And if you know Seinfeld, you know who Kramer is. And this, I can assure you, has absolutely nothing to do with the Vilna Gaon. Okay? No, I skipped a little bit. The Vilna Gaon died in 1797. So from the day that the Vilna Gaon died, it was never seen to be appropriate Again, as far as I don't know, the next day, the day after, it was never appropriate for someone else to be, I'm the chief rabbi of Vilna. You can't be the chief rabbi of Vilna. Like what are you talking about, the chief rabbi of Vilna? So they had other terms, the head of the Beit Din. So who was the head of the Beit Din who died in 1940? That was Rav Chaim Ozer Grudzinski. Okay, so Rav Chaim Ozer was seen to be the absolute Gadol Hadar at the time. By the way, it may be of interest to you that Rav Chaim Ozer had a first cousin, maybe slightly different, maybe once removed, but I believe it was a first cousin who became the rabbi in Omaha, Nebraska. You can look up Grudzinski, Omaha, Nebraska. You'll find there was a Rabbi Grudzinski there who learned in the same yeshivas and whatever, and he ended up he had a stellar in Omaha, Nebraska. No, he's a Chabad. He lived in Vilna. So he was again. Let's get back and make sure you can all focus now. In 1940, in Av, a couple days before Tisha B'Av, the person who's considered the Gadol Hadar passes away, and it's Chaim Ozer Grudzinski. Okay, so now he's passed away. In America, at that point, probably the most important Orthodox rabbi was a rabbi who lived in Cincinnati. And who would that be? Rabbi Eliezer Silver. Rabbi Eliezer Silver, who was a huge Talmud Chacham and a character. He was, again, a lot of what emerges in America afterwards in terms of the establishment, protecting kashrut laws and other, he was involved in a lot of this. Again, great deal of charisma and again, Talmud Chacham, everything, that you would want. He was once called in I believe it was a Senate subcommittee to testify, and I think it was about something about conscience. And for the record, state your name, Eliezer Silver, and who are you? So he was arguably the greatest rabbi in America and Canada. He would always say, and Canada, right? In America and Canada. And then the response was, Rabbi, that's not very modest of you. He goes, I'm under oath. Okay.
Where did he live again?
Cincinnati. Well, a bunch of places. Harrisburg, but he ends up in Cincinnati, which will explain why something then happens in Cincinnati, not all that much afterwards. So I'm reading right now. It's an old journal which is called Hapardes. You can find them online, although this one was not there. This one was the one that I wanted is not there. I don't know why I had to find it someplace else, but there's a thing called Hebrew Books that has lots and lots of the old journals. But in Hapardes, and I'm reading from year 14, Choveret Vav. It's not, you don't have it. You can look, but you don't have what I'm reading from. And it writes, Biyom Hei to Bet, which means Thursday till Monday, they made a convention. Knisa Hashniya Shel Agudas, I had to read Agudas, I couldn't say Agudat. Shel Agudas Yisrael, Cincinnati, Ohio. So now if you want to know why the second annual convention of the Aguda in 1940 is in Cincinnati, Ohio, it's because the head of the Aguda lives in Cincinnati, Ohio. So if you live in Cincinnati, okay, everybody come to Cincinnati. And it says that on the days of Biyom Hei Tebet, Yud Chet Kav Bet, Menachem Av, Hitkaima HaKnisa Shniya Shel Aguda Yisrael, Cincinnati, Ohio. HaKnisa Niftacha B'Hitorut Tfilah V'Tachnunim. It started with prayers and with pleas. Hidliku ner neshama, and they lit a ner neshama. L'zikaron nishmat Hagon Rabban Shel Yisrael Maran Reb Chaim Ozer Zeichet Tzadik, and so on and so forth. Echad mimirishonei miyastei Agudat Yisrael. So again, Agudat Yisrael, he's one of the founders of Agudat Yisrael, and here they're having a convention. Hitpalu Mincha v'nemru Tfilah v'Tachnunim Kapitel Tehillim. You want to know which ones? Kaf and Kuf Bet. V'Tfilah Hayal Pipio Tachenu Kol Beit Yisrael B'Chulei Nemru Meharav of Yehuda Aryeh Perlov Ha'admor Minovominsk from Brooklyn. So the Novominsk Rebbe, he's the one who said the Tehillim, and that's how they started off their convention. I can actually give you a day-by-day, session-by-session, what took place by the convention, but I'm supposed to talk about Parshat TETZAVEH, and somebody may at some point accuse me of deliberately moving on the side. But now it says as follows: B'knisiyazo, at this particular convention, hishtatef achad miyichidei skula, one of the incredible individuals, mishal shelet gaonei hayichus Yisrael. somebody who comes from the most illustrious of families, Hagon Hagadol Isha Eshkalot, the incredible, not just regular, Gon Hagadol, the great sage, the man of all kinds of skill. Ish Eshkalot is somebody who possesses all abilities. Ruchulabe Harav Yosef Dov Halevi Salavechik Shlita Ha'av Beit in Boston. Harav of Yosef Ber Salavech Nimna Lachaver Laguda Israel. He is on the Aguda's on the board. V'nivchar liyoshev Rodvad Hapoel Hamerkazi Lekol Ha. Medina, and he's now on the board of the national board. Who mahaveh koach gadol Yisrael. This is an incredible thing that Yisrael got such a person. V'davar gadol asab is a harakoach haTorah Yerushato, and he showed his power in Torah, what he inherited. Mizikno hagona amiti saratorah Rash Bagahag, which means the greatest rabbi. His grandfather, Rav Chaim Halevi Mibrisk. Asher Hayimi Mastei Agud Yisrael, and Reb Chaim was one of the founders. Nechto Hagon of Yosef Dov Soloveitch Shlita Asher Kibel Derech HaTorah Miziknei Hagon. He has inherited his grandfather's approach to learning. Kamo Shereh B'Shiurav HaNiflaim, as he has shown by his incredible lectures. Amitztainim Bekoach Amul Kotva Hasfara, with his ability to show depth and explanation. L'Talmidei HaYeshiva to Boston, as he showed in the yeshiva. By the way, at that point he's not in YU yet. Something's going to happen very soon that he's going to get to YU. But at this point, he has yeshiva in Boston, which is called Yeshiva Heichel Reb Chaim Halevi. And there were two rabbis working there. One was the Rav, and the other was his cousin, Rav Yechiel Michel Feinstein, who was Rav Moshe's nephew. And Kibel Gam Besurat Avot B'Chaim HaPolitiim, and he also has inherited his family's approach to politics. Lagein B'Cherev Nefesh Al Kodshe Yisrael, Ke'eta Cherei Hatmunato L'Chaver Yisrael Yarash Miziknei Hagon Koach HaTorah Ve'Ayira, and he's inherited from his grandfather his political and his ability and his Torah and his fear of God. V'Yosefu Hashalita Moshel B'Chol B'Torato V'Yirato. V'Yosef, and he, again, playing on the word Yosef, he has inherited this ability in terms of every single possible thing. Now, why did I just now waste your time? Other than I think that it's interesting, and ultimately, as long as I'm in charge, so then I could say whatever I want. So Yom Aleph Be'erev, on Sunday night, we're skipping a lot of what happened beforehand, but just to see the names of the people that were there, it is really quite interesting because everybody's there. That's really part of it. Everybody's there. Rav Moshe's there. I'm just saying everybody is there. It says that Yom Aleph Be'erev. So finally on Sunday night, after Shabbat, it talks about how the Shabbat was and everything. And after Shabbat, it says, Lebechi u'lemisbeid alekach me itanu hadon halokim hanezer ramada hagon amiti rash b'hag marana Rav Chaim Ozer. So now this session is dedicated to Rav Chaim Ozer. It says they lit a ner neshama, and again they said Tehillim, this time TETZAVEH and Kuf Mem Bet, pasuk b'pasuk. And
the Tehillim said for at that time. The same word.
For the same, yeah.
No, but why? Just
Leiloi neshama. For Leiloi nishmas Reb Chaim Ozer.
oh,
And then Rabbi Lezer Silver got up and he started to describe the loss. Somebody else who had been a student says something, and then we get to the main event, and the main event was Rav Soloveitchik gave a hesped. So Rav Soloveitchik in the whole place, he was the one. Now, I'm just going to give a little bit more of the history, and then I'm going to have to get back to our learning. I've heard Rav Shechter refer to this a couple of times, that the Rav used to come to Vilna for when he was learning in Berlin. He used to come to Vilna for weekends every now and again, and he would hang out with Rav Chaim Ozer. So I actually looked at how long it would take by train today to go from Berlin to from Berlin to Vilna, and it's around 18 hours. I'm not so convinced how often someone would do that for a weekend. Yeah, like you could fly to New Zealand or something in less time. So I'm not so sure how much he actually went, but I can say is that his parents no longer are there. especially before he gets married. So he is really alone in Europe. So who does he hang out with? So he goes to Vilna. Who can he talk to? He could talk to Chaim Ozer. Now, a couple more things are of Chaim Ozer, and then we'll get to the main point. Chaim Ozer was an incredibly exceptional individual. From some of his tshuvot, you come to this realization that he probably didn't have any time to learn after he was, pick the age, 15, 16, 17 years old, and everything that he knows, he learned beforehand, and he knows everything. And Rav Soloveitchik would tell over the story a number of times that he would sit and work all week or all month on a thing, and he would learn, he would work everything out. He'd come to Chaim Ozer, say it over, and Chaim Ozer would point at the shelf, pull out a book, and say, yeah, he wrote that. And whatever it is he would say, that Rav Chaim Ozer always knew, and he said it was very frustrating. Like you sit and you learn, Rav Chaim Ozer knows it already, and can tell you who already said it before you. So there was a mentorship. I could say another thing is that when the Rav did get married, Rav Chaim Ozer was his Masada Kedushin. Okay? And there was certainly a relationship. Again, how strong to put it, mentorship, whatever. I did see quoted at one time, they talked about the Zionist Congress and talk about the possibilities of having a country, a Jewish country, land of Israel. And Chaim Ozer, who was known for his political acumen as well, not just his Torah, he turned his hand over and he said, the same odds of hair growing on your palms were the odds of ever having a Jewish country in Israel. He says it's just not going to happen. He goes, politically this can't happen. So some of you may know that that's not how it worked out. So now let me get to the point of all of this, and that is I have the entire Hesped. Actually, that's not fair. There's at least 3 different versions of the Hesped. One version is what he actually said. I don't know if in his notes, if the Rav had left his version of it. I know what was published in one of the Rav's books down the line, and there it started at a particular place and it ended a particular place. In Harpardes, in the next journal, it said, here's a synopsis of what he said. So I have the synopsis is bigger than what's published in the Rav Sefer, and it starts earlier and it ends later, so there's a bit more. What can I say? But why now? Let's focus. Why are we here? Because the topic, or at least the way that, and this you do have in source number 15, and we called it Hatzitz v'Hachoshen. So that's a little small, and I don't know how well you can read it. Yeah, but over here somehow it did get bigger. So Shnei bigadim mi bigdei Kohen Gadol hudgeshu biyoter biyachas l'tu'udatam al yedei hakatuv. Hatzitz v'Hachoshen. Among all the things the Kohen Gadol would wear, there were 2 things which really were exceptional, and one is the tzitz and the other is the choshen. Hatzitz, v'asita tzitzahav, kadosh l'Hashem, v'ya al metzach Aaron, v'nasa Aaron et avon hakadoshim asher yakdishu b'nei Yisrael l'kol matanot Kedoshayim, v'hayu al mitzchot tamid l'ratzon l'fnei Hashem, which we saw. Hachoshen, v'nasa Aaron et Hashem b'nei Yisrael, v'choshen mishpad al libo, b'vo l'kodesh l'kol l'fnei Hashem tamid. And again, one thing which is interesting, they flipped the order around from the way that they were actually presented in the Pesukim. V'natate l'choshen et mishpad, v'urim et atumim, v'yu al lev Aaron, b'vo l'fnei Hashem, v'nasa Aaron mishpatei b'nei Yisrael, libo l'fnei Hashem tamid. Shtei matarot nifredot v'shonot hiktsiv lahem hakatuv. Hatzitz haya martzeh al ha'tumot. The tzitz forgave all kinds of things that were tameh. Hatzitz haya kolonu kadosh la'Hashem. Hatzitz haya natun al metzach shel Aaron keneged merkaz hasechel v'hadat. Hachoshen haya lev Aaron merkaz ahava v'chiba liYisrael. So let's translate a little bit. So what he just now did is that he moved to the location of the 2. That one is on the head. Head generally would be intellect. The other is on the heart. Heart is generally going to be emotions. And he says, therefore, the tzitz is dealing with the mind of Aaron, sechel v'dat, and the choshen on the lev of Aaron, which is the place of love for Israel. Kol shemot hashvatim hayu charutim alav, and therefore the names of all the tribes. That's why again that point of all inclusive, everyone has to be there. V'katuv karotan choshen hamishpat, mishpat b'nei Yisrael masoria lechoshen. Hatzitz haya poseg sheilot be'isah v'heter. The tzitz would be poseg questions of things allowed and not allowed. B'tameh v'tahor, b'chayiv v'chayiv u'v'patur. Hatzitz haya poseg ba'ohel zrok shmei ohel, b'tumah masa b'tumah evin masmeh. Hatzitz haya poseg hilchot b'hilchot aguna, kiddushin v'gittin, b'hilchot migo v'helech, b'tarovot b'treifot, b'ktamim v'dam nida. Now that whole sentence over there, I don't know if one word of that is correct. But what he did is again, if there's something which eluded me, then I apologize. I just don't know that that's what the tzitz was really for. The tzitz was, as we saw, what it says. It's for tum'ah, and it brings about ritzui. Over here, he's using it in terms of all things all tum'ah and tahara, and as a rabbi would paskin in those areas. HaChoshen posek b'sheilot bayot misug acher legamre. But what with the Choshen? E'ele o lo ale. Go to war or not. E'ele lachem b'sonei zeh o lo ale. Eshtamesh b'midat mashmo v'dome umasa. E'ele o lo ale. Tzarech ani lamchot keneged malchut zu. Essentially, he turned all of this into political questions, which means politically, is this something, do we go to war, not go to war? And these are questions. Do we have a rally? Do we protest? All political questions. Plonit, almonit, modernit, so essentially, he now moved the tzitz into all areas of intellect and things which are pure Torah, and then the Choshen of all areas which are political, which are a different type of a question. And so on and so forth. Sheilot eile nugot bebeit ina shel Knesset Yisrael hayu nifsakot eidei HaChoshen she'al leiv Aaron leiv ko'ev mechovei amo. And again, now he's going to brilliantly explain how the heart of the Kohen would be the realm of all of these things. And I'm not going to read the rest of it. I do invite you to, and if you want, I can send you a much bigger version of it. There's this other section at the very bottom, which is on the right side. Yeshna igeret echad me anshe rainos lekadmon echad. I also searched for this and could not find this. Sheila behilchot treifa v'shelat biyachas l'mashiach hasheker. That there was two questions asked of the same rabbi. One was a question, is this thing kosher or not? And the other was a question about somebody who apparently was a false messiah. Shtei shelot halalu kruchot zu bazu dvukot u'muchabrot heina. They were both asked in the same question to this rabbi. Mish yadalef Torah to Rishonah, yadalef Torah gam et Shniah. The person who had the acumen to be able to answer the halacha question also knew how to answer this much larger, and he would be calling it a political question. Mish yadalef sok be'ilchot raya. Somebody knows about the kashrut of the lungs. Also knows how to paskin regarding, is the redemption coming? Ulavdil ben Mashiach ha'emet u'Mashiach ha'sheker. U'misha lo yadat Rishonah lo haragam b'shniah. And he then went on in this hesped to say that in this world there seems to be a lack of respect for the rabbi who's the big Talmud Chacham, and maybe think that someone else knows a little bit more politically and somebody else understands more. And what his whole argument over here is how the tzitz and the choshen are together on the Kohen Gadol. Now, if you're not understanding what's going on, Rav Soloveitchik just now gave one of the most eloquent and brilliant arguments in favor of Das Torah, which essentially is that all questions need to be asked of the rabbi. The rabbi is the one who knows the halacha, and he's therefore going to be the one who's going to have this ability. He's going to have this Kodesh Lashem. He's going to have the Choshen, the Urim V'Tumim. He is the Urim V'Tumim. So therefore, he knows magically everything to do. Now, again, what's really interesting is here's Rav Soloveitchik, before the age of 40 years old, who is at a Aguda convention arguing the Aguda line in terms of Das Torah. By the way, he later on told people who asked that he never heard of the concept of Das Torah before he came to America. That in Europe, he never heard of it. There's also what to say that Das Torah was created, and I may be guilty of overstating my argument, but it was created and utilized in order to show that the religious Zionism or Zionism generally did not have authority. And that then, therefore, the person who is the biggest Talmud Chacham, he's the one who knows when, if it's time to go back to Israel, not time to go back, to build a Jewish state, not to build a Jewish state, to force God's hand, or whatever that would mean, and so on. But I'm saying what's really interesting is Rav Soloveitchik is there, and he was close with Chaim Ozer, and he was a phenomenal speaker. Again, there's other descriptions of what happened that weekend, how he lit up the room, and everybody was following him around. He was very charismatic. Do you remember, or you not really? Yeah. So he was very, very charismatic, and he was, and again, he was able to get up in front of 5,000 people and be absolutely spellbinding. And those of us who knew him in English were told English. I mean, that's not his first or second or third language. I mean, in Yiddish, he really was his ability to speak, and he was a phenomenal speaker. And clearly, he was a very, very smart man. But in a certain sense, I want to go back to what I said from the beginning. My almost default thought process about the Tzitz and the Choshen went back to this essay, which I had known for years and years and years. And then I started to go back and to think a little more critically, and this, of course, will be an act of deconstruction, and saying, hold it, is that really true? Is this really true? And it's this great overstatement. By the way, if the Rav eventually moves over to the Mizrahi, and which is very much a post-Holocaust, late 40s, 1950s, moves over to the Mizrahi, and there's lots of different ways to understand it, but it could be that he felt that that the way that religious Zionism was handling certain things was the correct way, and it doesn't mean that his religious Zionism of any or any other person, but he aligned himself there. I do want to say one more thing. It's also interesting that not long after this, there will be two tragic deaths, which almost could destroy YU. They lost their Rosh Yeshiva and they lost their president. The Rosh Yeshiva was his father, Rav Moshe Soloveitchik, and the president was Dr. Revel. And Rav Soloveitchik put himself up as candidate for both positions. That very much follows this, is that no, the same person should be the Rosh Yeshiva, should be the president, and he's ready to run everything. No, he by the way, he almost didn't get either. They didn't want to give him to be Rosh Yeshiva because they thought he was too much with the Aguda. He was too much. And by the way, the Aguda is fighting for him to get the job. So you know why you did? They hired him, but almost didn't give him a salary. And they said, sure, you can work here. We'll try you out for a year. But by that point, it was obvious. But he was very lucky that he didn't get the presidency, because I think his life and things would be very different. But I'm just saying is that desire to do both, I think, goes back to this speech of saying that, no, it's the same source. And eventually he backs down. And you could find all kinds of letters and all kinds of expressions subsequently. When he's asked to become chief rabbi of Israel, he says, no, I'm just a teacher. I don't know there's other realms. I can't do these other things. But the other thing is, if you look at some of the speeches that he gave to the Mizrahi, and that's in a book in English, the Rav Speaks. Originally it was the 4 drashot, and it was in Yiddish, and you could find, and then became the 5 drashot. And originally there were 4, now it's 5. I think now there's even more. They found more now also. And one of them is Yosef and the brothers. And it is an absolutely anti-Das Torah speech and then essay by saying, yeah, the big tzaddikim, but God paskined against them. They were wrong. And again, the Holocaust weighs very heavily on this. But I do now want to go back. And again, I just showed you one way that this Tzitz and the Choshen is taken. And when I say that I have a hard time with this, I think Rav Soloveitchik in subsequent years would not necessarily have signed off on everything that he said over there. And it's interesting. It's not just that to the Aguda that's who he was at that particular point, and that's the way they had seen the world. What's interesting, it says that he's following his family's footsteps. His father was much more with the Zionists than his grandfather was, and his father suffered a lot by this. That his father went to America may have been because he couldn't get a real proper job in Europe, and he had to move over. He ended up being in a place, again, I don't want to do too much of the history, he ended up being in a place that he was marginalized. And in America, then he became a Rosh Yeshiva, but tragically he died relatively young, and nobody saw it coming. And therefore, Rav Soloveitchik felt that he had to take the place, and he does. But, excuse me, no, Rav Silver is a little different. He takes the place of his father. So, let's get back to where of his father as Rosh Yeshiva in YU, Rav Moshe Soloveitchik. So now let's try to get back and try to make sense out of some of these things. One is that I want so it's interesting because that we actually touched last week. It means acceptance. From the word Ratzon, accepted from God. L'Ratzon lahem, which essentially means Vayal Metzach. If you want to go to that last pasuk in source 1, the last pasuk Lamed Chet, last verse in source 1, Vayal Metzach Aaron v'nasa Aaron et avon hakadashim asher yakdishu b'nei Yisrael l'kol matanot kodsheim v'yal mitzchot tamid l'Ratzon l'fnei Hashem. Essentially, what that verse says is that if something got messed up in the bringing of a kohen, bringing of a korban, then there will nonetheless be ritzui, nonetheless the korban is going to be accepted. So I want to back up and look at source number 2 for a second. Source number 2 is last week, Truma, build the Mishkan, but right away build the Aron, on the Aron put the Kruvim, on the Kruvim put, and then we're told, V'no'arati lecha, v'natan lecha, Kaf Aleph in source 2, v'natan lecha et Aron milamala, v'tron titein ha'te'edut asher etein elecha. So Lucha will be inside the Kruvim and the whole covering of the ark. ונועדתי לך שם, ודיברתי איתך מעל הכפר, מבין שני הקרובים, אשר על ארון העדות, את כל אשר אצווה אותך אל בני ישראל. So, as much as I can then try to put an argument for the tzitz and the choshen and God communicate, we have a different apparatus whereby the halacha really, or God's speech really can be articulated. And that has nothing to do with the Kohen or Kohen Gadol per se, that has to do with Moshe Rabbeinu. This is how God speaks to Moshe. So I would say, presumably, what does God say to Moshe? Well, a lot of the things that Rav Soloveitchik put into the Tzitz and the Choshen could have been there, but I also want to show you something else where this eventually goes. Because you could say to me, yeah, that's true when there's Moshe Rabbeinu. And Moshe Rabbeinu is Av the Nevi'im. So therefore Moshe Rabbeinu receives the prophecy. But what happens subsequently? So I'm going to read to you something in the Kuzari, and then we'll look at what Rav Kook did with it, and then we'll see something in the Rambam, and I'll tell you something else about that. Look at source number 2. Sorry, it's just source 2. Look at source number 3, the Kuzari. Amar HaChaver, Toratenu kshura b'halacha l'Moshe misinai, o min hamakom asher yivchar Hashem, ki mitzion tetzei Torah dvar Hashem Yerushalayim. The Torah has its source at Sinai, and or it has its source from Zion, Ki mitzion tetzei Torah dvar Hashem Yerushalayim. And as I said, you can read the rest of that section, but look at Rav Kook in source number 4. Shitata Kuzari, hidulo tasur midoraita, this idea that you have to listen to the rabbis. By the way, that would go back to this, if you want a dat Torah, you have to listen to the rabbis. Hidafka al beitin hagadol shabemikdash. That's not any rabbi. That's not any rabbi existed in history. That's only the power of the Sanhedrin who you need to listen to. Dafka beitin hagadol, but why? Why do they have that authority? So first of all, you could just say, because that's authority. You get authority. So, right, beitin hagadol, pshita dekra dichtiv b'makom ahu. First of all, when the Torah talks about lo tasur, it says that place. It's connected to the place. V'ulai hu adin kol beit din gadol ki yotze b'zeh v'tamo mishum SHIUR ruach hakodesh. And the point is that there is this understanding that the Beit Din Hagadol has ruach hakodesh. Who do you have ruach hakodesh? It's that's part of being by the Beit HaMikdash. And again, I may have touched this last week when I talked about the Sulam, and the Sulam is up, and the prayers go up, and or the angels go up, angels come down. But again, what he's saying is that by the Beit HaMikdash, we have a place of avoda, but we also have a place of a Beit Din Hagadol that has its special status, and part of that special status is that that court somehow has Ruach HaKodesh because God gets involved in history and God has a will about what and how things should be practiced, and therefore God gives this inspiration to the people that are there. And he's saying, and that's why you have to listen to them, because Dafka in that place. So therefore, yes, like the Kuzari had said, it's by Sinai and it's by Tzion, Ki mitzion tetzei Torah dvar Hashem Yerushalayim. So therefore, it's Dvar Hashem Yerushalayim. But what made it Dvar Hashem? We say again, that's Pshat in the pasuk, is that God gives that kind of inspiration. So, and we'll read the Rambam in a second, but now you realize that by claiming that all of this was part of, any rabbi at any time, or let's say the Gadol Hadar is going to have this ability of all political understanding and all this understanding. So that in a certain sense, what's the term they use today? Judicial overreach is claiming all kinds of abilities which are not necessarily, which are there. Although, again, you can argue that God has will and God's will is going to take place. But let me put it differently. Rav Soloveitchik was quoted in subsequent years as saying, somebody would ask him a military question. A general has to deal with a military question. A rabbi doesn't have that ability to be able to know how you have a medical problem. You go to a rabbi, you go to a doctor. So you go to a doctor, you have a medical problem. It could be that if you go to a doctor and the doctor says, "Listen, you could have this dangerous surgery, and if it works, than this, or you can have this other thing, and there's different. So then maybe you could go to a rabbi and say, hello, here are my choices over here. How do I approach my choices? But that's not the same thing as the rabbi doing the diagnosis and telling you, oh, just drink this water and you'll be fine, and and you don't need any kind of. So I'll say it again. Rav Soloveitchik was very clear about this. You go to doctors, you go to professionals, and again, it could be that a rabbi then will have what to say, but not that he has this Urim V'Tumim on him, that any question which is posed to him, he automatically has this divine inspiration and knows the answer to these things. So again, I'm going to call this. I know that there's this whole political and interesting religious background, which is the reason why I went there with, what exactly is this Tzitz and the Choshen and where does it take us? So let's again try to get a little bit further. The Rambam in source. Eventually, was he in favor or against Das Torah? Well, he spoke very strongly in terms of Reb Chaim Ozer's Das Torah, right? But then, at some point, when he moves away from the Agudah and he moves towards Mizrahi, he moves away from that, and he says, "Listen, just because they're great Talmidei Chacham doesn't mean that they were right in terms of politics." And he said further, he said, "God paskined against." God is the ultimate one who decides, and he didn't decide like they decided. And therefore, look, one of the very difficult conversations, which can get you into a fight if you have to, is to say that the vast majority of the rabbis in Europe before the war were saying to stay in Europe. So, again, that's what's so interesting about the Chamesh Drashot. In one of the first Drashot there, he says that the mistake, and he turns into Yosef and the brothers. He said that the brothers, which are the other rabbis, who are great tzaddikim and great rebbes and he goes, they judge the future through the lens of the past. He goes, what we've done in the past is what we'll do in the future. And Yosef judged the future through the future. And Yosef was the dreamer and saw the future, and they only saw their past. And the past is in Europe. We're going to stay in Europe. And Yosef sees that we're going to become farmers, and we're going to be planting, we're doing other things, and Yosef sees the future. And God paskined like Yosef. So that was again, just to realize that in context now, that is a very anti-Das Torah approach, but you don't realize who he's attacking. Who's he attacking? He's attacking Rabbi Yosef Soloveitchik from 1940. He's attacking his own position that he had articulated so eloquently. So I'm saying that's what's really interesting. This whole speech of the Tzitz and the Choshen, he's really attacking this in his later talk. So as I said, that becomes very interesting. In source number 5, the Rambam, and this is the Rambam in Hilchot Sanhedrin, writes, Kovim b'tchila beitin agadol b'mikdash, v'hu anikra Sanhedri gadola, u'minyanam shivim be'achad, shenem asvali shivim, right, uziknei Yisrael, u'Moshe al gabehem, and Moshe then sits with them. So that is, perhaps the original. Then he continues and he talks about the head of the Sanhedrin subsequently, and he writes, Hagadol b'chachmash b'kulam u'shivon rosh aleihem, v'hu rosh yeshiva, v'hu shekorin chachim nasi, b'chol makom, v'hu omeid tachat Moshe Rabbeinu. And he's the one who sits in the place of Moshe, which is also said. The Rambam didn't have to go that far. So you could argue here that the Rambam maybe agrees with the Kuzari. When it comes to the Beit Din Agadol, which was in Yerushalayim, then you somehow have, I'll even say Bezer Anpin, just to make people happy, on a microcosm, but it's still the power of Moshe Rabbeinu in a sense, and therefore Kimitzion Teitzetov Dvar Hashem Yerushalayim, that there's still Dvar Hashem. Now that doesn't mean that you listen to the majority of rabbis outside of the Beit Din Agadol. So again, there's 2 points. One is authority, and the other point is actually substance. Those are not the same. Authority versus, I'll tell you exactly, authority versus substance. Do I listen to the Beit Din Agadol because they have the authority, or do I listen to the Beit Din Agadol because it's Dvar Hashem? Right? Is it Dvar Hashem because he gave them the authority, or is Dvar Hashem because God is telling them what to do? That's really, really different.
That's like the ultimate authority.
I know, but is it because, are you listening to the Beit Din Agadol because God said listen to the Beit Din Agadol? Simon says. Or are you listening to the Beit Din Agadol because it's Dvar Hashem Yerushalayim? And God is communicating with them still. By saying that he's in the place of Moshe Rabbeinu, that's a very powerful statement. I would like to believe that most people don't believe that they're sitting in Moshe's seat, right? Just one second. And what I'm saying is, I think that the Rambam, I could force it into, I don't know how much I'm forcing, into what Rav Kook understood from the Kuzari. That God gives Torah to Moshe at Sinai, and God gives Torah in Yerushalayim. Ki mitzion Torah dvar Hashem Yerushalayim. Not just a question of authority, quite the other way around. Why do they have the authority? Because it's dvar Hashem. Because there is mahut, because there's essence as well, and God is communicating. No. But I'll say it again. Yes, God gives the authority. But is it just simply that I have to listen because God said listen to the majority? Or is God still communicating and telling them what it is that they should be doing? Which means there's no prophecy. But I'm going to now ask you again, what do those words mean? Ki mitzion tetzei Torah udvar Hashem Yerushalayim. So is it dvar Hashem because God is still communicating? That's what the Kuzari strength. That's what he emphasized. Now, again, does every single rabbi have that ability? You know what? Subjectively, really, totally subjectively, I think there's lots and lots of rabbis who will tell you that when they're answering questions, they have this, you happen to pull one book off the shelf. Look, somebody asked me a question last Shabbos, right? I went to shul for mincha in a different shul, pull a book off the shelf, open it up, and it's the answer to his question. Right, just opened up to that page, it's the answer to the question. I took a picture, I sent it to him. And he goes, oh, that's great. I said, I just want you to know, it was totally random that I was there. Random, I pulled that book off. Random, I opened up to that page. And there's the answer to the question. There's a great story with the Noda Yehuda. The Noda Yehuda was, at that point, a candidate to become the rabbi of Prague. And Prague had lots of Talmidei Chachamim who thought a lot about themselves. And they all wanted to give this candidate, give him a hard time to see, how up he is and how good he is and how much he can answer. So one of them then asks a question, which is essentially an impossible question to answer. And the Noda listens to the question, and he says, let me ask you one thing. He goes, I don't know the answer, but let me ask you one thing. I don't know, but let me ask you. Is this a real question or did you make it up? So the guy said, I made it up. He goes, I thought so. He goes, why? He said, because whenever I get a real question, I feel some kind of divine inspiration. I know the answer. Because God gives answers to Klal Yisrael. But God doesn't give answers for my ego. Which means when it comes to my reputation, God doesn't care about my reputation, but God cares about Klal Yisrael. So therefore, I felt that I was just totally blank, had no idea whatsoever. So that's why I felt that you made it up, and I have no idea of the answer. That is so interesting, but I'm going to say I understand that completely. I understand the Noda Yehuda completely. He's saying when there's you need to answer something, so then Kadosh Baruch Hu is going to help you because Klal Yisrael needs an answer. You can't just not. But if just somebody wants to give him a hard time, no, Kadosh Baruch Hu didn't want to protect him. Let's again try to make a little bit more progress, and I don't want you to completely be convinced we didn't learn anything today. In source number 6. The Ramban speaks about the clothing of the Kohen Gadol. This Ramban is important more than anything else because he calls the clothing of the Kohen Gadol really clothing of royalty. The royal colors, the royal purple, the royal blue, and so on. He also makes a reference to Yosef, to the coat of many colors. So I don't know if you ever thought about the Kohen Gadol's clothing as a coat of many colors. I discussed this more in my other share I gave this week, and we're going to leave that. In Pasuk Lamed, which is halfway down the line there, a little less than halfway, in the Ramban, he starts talking about the Urim V'Tumim. First of all, he quotes the Ibn Ezra, where it's bold. Savar Rabbi Avram l'tchakem b'inyan Urim V'Tumim. He wanted to be very clever. And you know that that sentence is not going to end well when you start like this. He ends up, V'lo amar klum. Right, he didn't say anything. Essentially, Ibn Ezra sees the Urim and Tumim in terms of an ability to discern and decipher astrological reality based on astrology. And the Ramban does not love astrology. The Ibn Ezra did, and he thinks that the Urim and Tumim was something which were divine. Because he'll note in the rest of this paragraph here, it doesn't say that they made it. It doesn't say but they placed it. It's really interesting over here. If you look again, next paragraph where it's lower, it never says to build it. Literally, on kilo yamase uman v'lo yalumanim v'lo lakal Yisrael be'amase v'lo nidva klal aval himsod masur l'moshe mipi agvura v'hu katvam b'ktusha o yumase shamayim ulakach yizkirum stam uv'yidia. that the Urim V'Tumim are something which is either a divine secret or it's something which was given by heaven, and it's really, again, as you're reading all these things, you'll make this, you'll make this, you make this, and you kind of think this must be the same thing, and he's not saying that. He's saying, no, the Urim V'Tumim are just a completely different thing. So, as I said, that is a really interesting comment by the Ramban, and clearly you see he goes on and on, so there's a lot more to say.
But they do make it.
There's a lot more to say about this. Look,
He says they never made it?
that's what he says. Doesn't mean they didn't have it. He just says they didn't make it. Now, let's get back to the word that you were asked about before, and that was ritzui, right? This idea of, which is really what the tzitz was for. There's a discussion about the tzitz. Does it work only if he's wearing it, or what if he's not wearing it, and what does the tzitz do? And the simple thing that it says is that, again, I want to make sure that you see the turn of phrase. That was the pasuk lamed chet again in source number 1, the last pasuk, that it's on his forehead. V'nasa Aaron et avon hakadashim asher yakdishu b'nei Yisrael. Right, what does that mean? Avon hakadashim and liratzon lefnei Hashem. So it creates ritzui even when there's something that had gone wrong. Ritzui means acceptance, divine acceptance. So now look at, just in order to argue, this is really what it means. That's really towards the beginning of the Parsha. Towards the end of the Parsha, we have the same concept coming up another time. And it's said so quickly, and it's the end of the Parsha, you don't pay attention to it, and it's only you have to pause and say, what did they say? And then you say, oh, that was really interesting. And let's just read at the end of the Parsha now. Source number 12. Viktir lav Aaron k'toret samim b'boker b'tivot neirot yaktirena. Uvalot Aaron et haneirot ben arbaim yaktirena k'toret tamim l'fnei Hashem l'dorotechem lo talav k'toret zara v'ola u'mincha v'nesech lo tischu alav, which all seems to be like random kinds of things. And then v'chiper, this is the end, v'chiper Aaron al kornotav achad b'shana, and he should bring about a kapara on the karnot of the mizbeach once a year. Midam chatat kipurim achad b'shana. Yechaper alav l'dorotechem kodesh kodeshim l'Hashem. What in the world is he talking about? So if you look at Rashi, achad b'shana b'yom kippurim. Oh, this is Yom Kippur. Shenemar, it says, "V'yitzei mizbeach asher lefnei Hashem v'chaper alav." Now, Chatat Kippurim heim parvis yer sheyom Kippurim machmir al tumot mikdash ukdoshav. What's the purpose of the par and the seir in Yom Kippur? To bring about kapara from tuma of the mikdash and ukdoshav. So now, we, especially in a post-temple world, we imagine Yom Kippur is a day to bring about forgiveness for us. Right? We sinned, please forgive us, and let's have a good year. Right? Yomim Manoraim. The problem is, and now you just saw Rashi on that pasuk, this is Yom Kippur. But there's an aspect of Yom Kippur that it's focusing on, and that aspect of Yom Kippur is not about us. Look at source 14 now, because I'm reading now straight from Yom Kippur. I'm reading from Parshat Acharimot. V'chiper ala kodesh mitumot b'nei Yisrael. You should bring about kapara for the kodesh, from all of the tumah of Bnei Yisrael, which means essentially part of what we need to get forgiveness for is when we messed up with the Mishkan. The Mishkan is something which is holy, and we may have turned the Mishkan into something which was not holy. We may have done things in the wrong way, and for that we need forgiveness. For that we need, if you misuse the Mishkan now is misused. So now what? How do you move forward further? Now think about what it said about the tzitz. Oh, you did something the wrong way. You brought something betum'ah. Oh, it's okay. It creates ritzoi anyway, which means, as opposed to what we saw from the very beginning. What's the tzitz is the intellect. This is kodesh l'Hashem. That part is true. It's kodesh l'Hashem. It's like this. You can pull out like this ace, right, or this, right. This get out of jail free card. It just changes everything. You did something wrong, but no, Kadosh Lashem. It's as if there's this overwhelming, some see this in terms of the machshava, that the Kohen Gadol can have this overwhelming machshava that everything should be tahor, right, directly Lashem, and then even if we messed up along the way, it makes it work anyway. It's like this macro consideration, even though we may have messed all along on all of the micro. But if you go and continue reading about Yom Kippur is a dual holiday. On the one hand, it's to fix something which is kadosh, which is the Mishkan. On the other hand, it's to fix something which is kadosh, which are people. which means, what is sin? Sin is when we brought about impurity in ourselves. He brought out impurity in our hearts, impurity in our minds, impurity in our actions, and we need forgiveness for all of this. But one of the things we need forgiveness for is that we brought impurity in something that was supposed to be pure, and that was supposed to bring about forgiveness for all the things, and that is, we messed up the thing that was supposed to fix. We messed up ourselves, we messed up our souls, we messed up the Mishkan, we messed up the Beit HaMikdash. So Yom Kippur really is a day to fix that. And when you realize this is articulated at the end of the Parsha, and now you go back to the tzitz there towards the beginning of the Parsha, you hopefully are not going to misunderstand what the tzitz was about. This is about to bring about tahara, even in a place where there could have been tumah, and bring about ritzui, where God is going to accept our avodah, even a place that there isn't. And you realize I had to work hard to do all of that, and it would have been much easier just to talk about the tzitz and the choshen in this das Torah kind of way. But what can we do? That even though we're very, very inspired by Rav Soloveitchik, we take solace in the fact that I think he moved far away from this talk as well. And by the way, others didn't. Even the Jewish Observer, actually, in the early 90s, published a part of that talk and arguing in front of Das Torah. And I could just imagine, he didn't bother writing a letter to the editor. Listen, I moved away from that talk and whatever. But it's interesting. Like, one of the few things that they ever published from him was his talk on Das Torah and his eulogy for Chaim Moser. Again, it really is wonderful and it's beautiful, but I'll say it again, we live in an age where there's some judicial overreach. There's some overreach in that as well, and we need to be careful about that also. Doesn't mean, Rav Lichtenstein has a really interesting article about Das Torah, and he says, listen, it doesn't mean the rabbis have the ability that some people think, but on the other hand, if you respect religion, then you should discuss things with your rabbis. Again, it doesn't mean that they have that ability, but maybe nonetheless, knowing lots and lots of Torah is going to be able to give great insight as well. Again, don't overstate it. Understand what it is, and we do need to consult, but we need to know why we're consulting and how we're consulting. Again, as you said, not instead of the doctors, but sometimes it could work very well in conjunction. Shabbat Shalom.